April 10th, 1915, and the house I was born in was a little house on the corner of Rice and University Avenue, which you never would find anymore. And I don't know how long my parents lived in that house, but then we moved over to Valley Street, and there were a lot of ethnic people that my mother and father knew that lived there, and we lived several years renting, a couple of years anyway, renting over there. And then the little house on the corner of Jackson and Valley was for sale, and my mother and father bought that.
Austin, Minnesota, October 7th, 1915.
Well, what kind of environment did you grow up in?
Well, my father died in the flu epidemic in 1918, and it was very difficult for my mother to keep us all together. There was, but when I was about 12 or 13, my oldest sister got us all together and rented a house in Fort Dodge, Iowa, so we could all be a family again. And then about a week later, the market crashed, and then my brother lost his job and my sister lost her job, and so they sent me to live with my uncles on a farm. And I had to hitchhike there, and it was about 80 miles. And the first night I slept in a covert, and the next night I got there after dark. But the spookiest part was that the last part I had to walk about 3 miles maybe down just the old country road. And every farm has got a big dog. It was dark, and every driveway I come to, every dog was out there barking, wanted to tear me apart. But anyway, I made it.
What was your childhood like in the city?
Well, I think my childhood was happy. You know, I can't say that I was ever unhappy or anything. I think it was good. My mother and father were very good parents. And at that time, wherever they went, we went, you know. They always took us with them, you know. And there was always something to do. We had to use a lot of imagination in whatever we did, you know, playing in one thing or another. And I think we were very happy children.
Oh, there was no jobs for anyone. In the area were very, very few. People had, you know, little grocery stores and stuff. Most of them survived. Some businesses didn't. But no, it was very difficult.
I looked for a job land. You went from one place to another, filling out applications, or no, we don't need anybody. So I finally got a job at Mandler Brush Company on 9th Street, and I got $9 a week, and I thought that was pretty good, you know. Yeah, and then later on they gave me $12 a week, and I thought that was on top of the world, you know. Yeah, so that was, that's what I did before I was married, you know, yeah.
What was the urban environment like in downtown St. Paul? Can you tell me about the general city environment and panhandlers and business people? And
well, the environment was okay. I mean, there was no dangers, you know. You never had to worry about walking the streets or going into the stores or being robbed or molested or anything like that. But there were people that were, I wouldn't say they were panhandlers, but I recall a couple of fellows there. One was a blind man, and he would sit outside of the dime store there with a cup in his hand, and people would drop coins in there, and he was there all the time. And the other man was a man that didn't have any legs, and he would do the same thing in front of another store there, you know, and wait for people to drop coins, and I suppose that's how they lived, you know.
After I had been on the farm with my uncle, I was there about 2 years, and I had learned a little about farm work, and it was a hard life, but everybody helped each other during harvest. When they cut their grain or something, everybody would come and shock and help you thrash, and there was just, and you help somebody else. But it's hard to describe. But then I was about 15, I think, and I and another kid, we took off and we just bummed the countryside for 4 or 5 months, and we worked in the fields, and we worked in barns and anything, because a lot of times all we got was something to eat. Nobody had any money, and I know we could work in grain fields sometimes, and you were up at about daylight. And by 6 o'clock you had your breakfast, and they give you a gallon jug of water. It's wrapped in burlap. It's wet, and it keeps it cool. It's surprising how cold it gets just from evaporation. And then about 10:30 in the morning, there'd be usually young girls or some would come out in the field and give you a new jug and maybe a sandwich or something. You go in for lunch, you had about an hour off, and then you went back in the field. You worked until it was almost dark, and then you went in. And the food was good. That was a lot of good food. And it all fit together. We used to sleep in the yard or in a barn, and we went all over. We finally went up in Memphis, Tennessee, and it's the first job I ever had, and I got on the painting crew. And there's a lot of big old mansions down there, and so I always got to paint all the high windows and all that sort of stuff. I was the smallest guy on the crew, and there was a whole bunch of jungles. That every town had one if a railroad stopped there. It was always the edge of town, and there was probably from 10 to 20 guys there, every night. And they had a big pot, and they would cook. But you had to contribute something. You had to go in town and beg for food or work for food, but fortunately we always had a little money, maybe $1 or $2, so we could go buy something and come back and put it in the pot.
Well, we lived in the same neighborhood, just a couple of blocks apart, and he was the same nationality background as we were, and we went to the same church, and I often saw him and his family, and I knew his family and the people that lived around him, and there would be dances and things, and we would both be at them, and that's how we saw each other. And eventually he asked me for a date, and from then on I guess we kind of saw each other more often until we started going together,
So what did he do for a living? How old were you when you met?
17.
You were 17,
Mm-hmm.
and what
and
did he do?
He was 3 years older than I was.
He was 3 years older?
Yeah.
And did he have a job?
Yes, he did. At that time, he worked for some stationery company, McLean and Hedman, downtown. Yeah, and he worked there for several years, and then he got another job at the streetcar company,
When was that?
Well, I think it maybe was, let's see, if I met him a couple of years after we were going together. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, this was now Depression years, and jobs were very scarce, and it was hard for the men to find a job. And the family knew somebody that was foreman there around or something. Anyway, this man somehow managed to get Paul in there, and he didn't have a very pleasant job. The streetcars had fireboxes underneath the streetcar that, in the wintertime, that you had to build a fire in there so the streetcar would be warm when it went out. And and when it came back in, you'd have to take the ashes out and everything. So that was his job, take the ashes out and build new fires and things, But a job was a job, and he was mighty happy to have it.
And did he had to support his family?
Well, at that time, yes. His during the Depression there, his family was on hard times. There were 6 in the family, and Paul had 2 other older brothers than himself, but neither one of them had a job, and his father got laid off, And so Paul was the only breadwinner in the family. So whatever his check was, he'd have to come and give it to his mother, and then she would give him 50 cents a week or something like that for his allowance, you know. He somehow knew about this place. It was downtown in one of the buildings downtown, and I don't remember where it was, but anyway, we had to go down there, and it was upstairs someplace, and he knocked on the door there, and they had a little peephole there where somebody looked out at you, and if you were all right, they opened the door and let you in. And so, and that's where they had music in there, and I don't know if they had some singers or something in there, you know. And what I don't remember about alcoholic drinks, but I know that I do remember that they had beer, and they would put alcohol on the top of the beer bottle, and that's what people were drinking there, you know, and dancing.
The world's different between bootlegging and prohibition. In the bigger cities, there was mafia and gangs, mobsters, Al Capone, and people always associated with them with bootleggers, but they were mobsters. And like Capone took over Chicago, and if you didn't agree to buying his beer or whatever, they'd kill you. They didn't matter, and a lot of protection. But they didn't have bootleg whiskey or alcohol or anything, because they had smugglers that brought it in from Mexico and Canada and all those places. And it was good. It was good liquor, good whiskey and gin and all this. And they had these bars like in some big building, and you go up there and you slide the door, and you knew the password, they let you in. And it was a big steel door. If the feds come up to raid it, try to catch you, it took them half an hour to break the door down. They always had an escape route into another part of the building, down in the basement. They were out of there before as generally speaking, where bootleggers, and the term comes from they sold alcohol in little half-pint jars, and they wear big boots, and they had 2 or 3 of them in their boots and long pants on, so that, you know. So, but it was a matter of survival. There was everybody knew about the treatment of the Jewish people, all that sort of stuff, and this country couldn't stand by and let them run over France and Belgium like they did in World War I. And they almost destroyed Britain. It was horrendous some of the things they did in bombs. But I was in the Army for about a year and a half, and well, until my daughter was born, and I was still in the States, and they didn't expect Ag to live. She was very, very serious, and Mary Ann was born with a heart defect. Her father was dying, you know, and there was just a lot of turmoil, and so I don't know how it happened, but the Red Cross tried to find me down in the swamps in Louisiana, wherever. But they couldn't, and then finally they did, and they got me out of the Army to maybe come back, because at that time the war hadn't been declared yet. But at that time, if you were over a certain age, you had children or a family responsibility, that you could get out. And so I couldn't see myself staying in the Army and worrying about my wife and the kids and all. So then I went out, and I was called back 3 different times. And then they canceled it. One time I had rented and we were getting packed and ready to move my still back to Stillwater, and then they canceled it. And then another time I was in line ready to get on an airplane or something, and they come and pulled me out. But I had went to a technical school and learned about resinous products, paint, plastics, and things of that nature. And I had a pretty decent job. I was a foreman in a plastic company. And there was very, very few people who knew anything about plastics. We would do a lot of war work, and a lot of this was precise and you know, a lot of expensive dyes. And so they sent me there, and I stayed there all throughout the war.
Oh, you were all shocked, of course, by the war. I remember sitting in front of the radio when I heard the news that Pearl Harbor was bombed, you know, and my little boy was next to me, and my father was there, and we just cried, you know. Well, anyway, then my husband, they had the draft, and my husband was number 4 on the draft, and he would have had to go immediately, but his company deferred him because they felt they needed him, you know. And so during the period of the draft, they would change things a little bit. They would change the ages of the people, the men who were being drafted, you know. And eventually, Paul, his number came up, and he was had to go. He went for his examination, and he was home on his furlough. And then they changed they lowered the age again, and so that he was exempted, and he didn't have to go at all then. Yeah, so he never did go.
It was great raising 8 kids, you know, and I had never been around small children or around a little baby in all of my life, until I married my wife, and so, but she knew all about that. She was a good mother, and you know, raising a family is a lot easier because in those days, and partially because of depression, neighborhood people were a lot closer. Mothers didn't work; they were home. They knew the neighborhood children and the neighborhood mothers, and they all helped each other, mothers and families, and so it was and they made a lot of lifelong friends. It was a different atmosphere, and there was gangs or juvenile. There wasn't any crime at all.
I had 3 nice boys, and there was no problem with the boys, you know. They always seemed to find something to do, and we lived in a neighborhood where there was a lot of things available for them to play with and do. They built shacks, underground shacks in an empty lot there, you know, and they played there. And then we just lived a couple of blocks from Phelan Park, and they had a nice skating rinks there, and things, and baseball diamonds, and the boys used to go down there and participate in those things. And when they were smaller, they used to there were enough boys in the neighborhood, so they organized little baseball teams of themselves, the Little Beavers, you know, and they would play on the playground across the street at the school there, or play someplace else with the other kids. And so they kept busy with hockey and baseball and one thing or another. They didn't seem to lack for anything to do because there was always somebody calling, you know, and come on, you know.
Well, probably the best thing I ever did was join the Catholic Church. And a few years later, I was, for about 45 years, and where I was an usher in the church. And I think one church is pretty much like the other. They all have their beliefs, and they all have the same goals and stuff. And I had a lot of friends, you know. We were through the Ushers Club. And you get involved in, we used to sell Christmas trees. We've done all kinds of things, you know, for the church. And we had a lot of good friends, and our children had a lot of good friends. And so I was, we never wanted for anything. I could use a better car now and then. But you may do with it. Mm-hmm. I'm proud of everyone, and they all, in the various stages of whatever, and they're all successful.
Do you want to say anything else about anything? Is there anything else you want to add?
Well, all I can say is that I think I had a very interesting life, and I guess you could say she had it all.